Dan is a local angler, a very experienced angler who covers many, many techniques, including fly and various spin fishing techniques. He fishes for all kinds of species all over North America and will be talking to us about various adventures he's had across North America today. So thanks, Dan. Over to you.
Yeah, hey, thank you. Um, yeah, so like Maro said, I've been fly fishing for most of my life, but the last bunch of years have been a much heavier focus on the fly fishing. Um, I've just kind of started to find more people who fly fish and don't have that older, this is my water, get off it mentality. So it's been a lot more of a reason for me to do it a bit more. So, and that led to a whole bunch of traveling. Like my lifestyle kind of brought on traveling as it was. My wife and her family, they're from South Florida, so I've been going down there a lot over the last 7 years. And then with work as a photographer, and videographer, I've ended up kind of all over the place. So today I'm going to talk about two of the places that I've fished quite a bit recently. It's been New York and Florida. So all these little dots. So this was the first light I was talking about. Everywhere that I fished, all these little dots are like places that I fished over the last couple years. So like I said, the Arctic tree line up at the top there, and then all the way down to the Key West, which is the southernmost part of the United States. Um, Here we go. Okay, it's close to Toronto. The season's always open. The regulations do change. There's a harvest season and a non-harvest season, and then the price of gas. Like I said, it was like 2.87 a gallon when we filled up this last weekend, um, which is like 67 cents a liter or something like that. So if I'm going to drive 2 hours north or an hour and a half north, why not drive an hour and a half south and pay half the price on gas? The other thing that really surprised me is how friendly the people on the river are there. One of the things that I've noticed with steelheaders up here, and not to like bash anyone in particular, but a lot of them kind of like get um, territorial about their spot. Like you walk up on them, they kind of get a little, either they'll give you a little bit of a cold shoulder or an attitude or something like that. The first time I was out fishing the river and was on the Lake Erie tribs, and I walked down and I see the guy fishing this little creek. It's not a huge pool. So I turn my rod around as I'm approaching. I'm like, "Hey, how you doing? It's not bad. I go, catch anything yet?" He goes, "No." I just sit there and I'm looking at the creek for a little bit, and he looks at me and he goes, "You gonna fish or what?" I was just kind of like surprised because I'm used to like, keep moving, buddy, right? So people are really nice on the river. The other thing is the amount of fish. Like my next slide, we're going to talk about their stocking numbers, but it's when I first went and saw how many fish were in these pools, how many fish were coming through, I went and I looked at the stocking numbers and I was kind of surprised. I always thought that Ontario did a really good job at putting fish in and keeping the fish coming through. But I'm kind of starting to think that we might actually be like Ontario might be benefiting from the amount of stocking New York does because the numbers are insane. The other nice thing is the fishing is pretty similar to Ontario for the most part. So if you've done any kind of steelhead or trout fishing up here, it does translate well down there. And the cool thing about fishing in this area, you have access to Lake Ontario fish and Lake Erie fish um, within like a 45-minute drive. So if the Lake Ontario tribs are blown out, um, within 45 minutes you can go. You're on the other side of the escarpment. They might not have gotten as much rain. They're not necessarily going to be blown out. They're also going to drain differently. So that's another advantage to kind of fishing this area here. What did I do? There you go. Yeah, so the stocking numbers. So the DEC puts in over 80,000 brown trout and steelhead a year, just in the Niagara River tributaries and in that area there. And their stocking charts are one of them. That's one way to find a bunch of different rivers out there. Taking a look at their stocking charts, they're going to get a run of fish. And it's not all stocked fish. A lot of these fish do end up reproducing, going to the lake, coming back. And one of the cool things about some of these stocked fish, like these are migratory browns, and these weren't even the biggest fish we caught that day or the biggest fish we saw that day. The Lake Ontario brown trout get to a certain point where they no longer spawn. So there's actually how is this explained to me? How can I explain this? Because they're no longer spawning, they no longer need to produce eggs. So none of what they eat goes into reproduction. It goes into growth. So there becomes like no cap on the size these brown trout can get. Um, you know,
That and that's because they've stocked sterile fish.
no, no, that's just a weird defect that happens with the stocking.
So
Um,
they're only able to reproduce for a certain amount of time, and then they
yeah,
can't make eggs anymore, and so all of their food goes into growth rather than
exactly.
right.
Exactly. So that's why I see some of those charter guys getting like 25, 30 pound brown trout. But it's like so these are like average brown trout you're gonna catch when you're going out there and fishing for them. But we have seen like 12 pounders and bigger in the river. And we're fishing for big fish. So, when we talk gear, I think you gotta go with at least a 7 weight rod. If you're fishing like single hand, because even these steelhead, like it's cold water, they're gonna they're gonna jump, they're gonna rock you. Like they're not easy fish to land when they're fresh in the river and they're cold water. Like they have tons of energy. Um, so this is just one line I want to point out, and I mean you don't have to go with this line specifically, but the thing about this line, so it's the anadrome indicator line from Scientific Anglers. So the thing about it, it's got the design of it. You can cast a streamer, or you can fish like an indicator, like a nymphing rig with it. If you put a poly tip on it, you can swing with it. So it becomes a really useful line if you're bringing like one rod with you. If you're going to travel, crossing the border, or you're going out with someone, especially for steelhead. It's got a strong core. And then it also gives you the ability, because it's overpowered, it's really easy to make a tuck cast with, which comes in handy when you're trying not to let your fly line go over these steelhead in clear water. So those are kind of the things that you want to be looking at when you're thinking of a line to use. Um, those Lake Erie tribs can get very clear. A lot of it is like higher gradient than some of the Lake Ontario stuff, so they just drain out real quick. Water gets low. You have to be stealthy with them. We'll go into rigs in a second, but some
Dan,
of the
Dan, can you go back to that line?
yeah,
Which end is the running line? I assume the tapered end is the running line,
correct.
and
So it's a
so it's
it's
got
fairly front heavy and it's got like a really long even belly. So even mending this line, like
yeah,
it's super easy to mend.
and the the very tip is colored.
It's a slightly like faded color compared to the rest of the line.
Got it. I see.
Yep. So it's even a little more stealthy and like I, I
And
know
this is
airflow
like
makes
for
something sorry.
and this is for nymphing mainly, or swinging,
Both. I
both.
wouldn't use it like I like not two hand swinging, but if you're single hand fishing, like
Yeah,
you can single hand you can swing with it no problem.
yeah. Okay,
Yep. Yeah,
interesting.
just it's like a size and a half heavy, right?
Yeah,
So
most lines are now.
yeah, yeah, but even like I feel like this size and a half heavy is even a little more so because it is kind of like front heavy in that
Right,
taper. So it's
right.
really easy to like one cast, get it out there with, with a nymphing rig. That's kind of, you want a one cast or a roll cast.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be probably a decent roll casting line. How big is the head roughly? Do you know?
If I remember off the top, you're asking me when numbers, man, that's a tough one. If I
Doesn't
remember
show in the
correct,
picture.
it,
Yeah,
from the
it's like a
back.
30-foot head kind of thing.
No, I think the head's shorter than that.
Okay.
Yeah, I
All
think it's a
right. Good
fairly
enough.
short head, but yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Um, yeah, no problem.
And what kind of leader do you use? Do you use a straight leader on that?
No, it depends on what I'm doing. So I'm gonna go through two rigs in a second here. I'll talk about flies
Okay.
and then the two different rigs. So
Okay.
um, most of the time, honestly, I'm fishing nymphs of some sort or nymphing style for these fish. Hare's ears has been one of my probably top flies out there. And I'll fish it down to like a size 18, depending on how clear the water is. I call it David's grand nymph. I'm not sure what David calls it, but he showed me this nymph the day I met him. And I've kind of been using it everywhere, and like it catches fish everywhere. It's the kind of little yellow and purple guy. Like that's my little modification of what he tied. And it is on the Isaac Walton site there. And flashy stones. Like I've tried using just regular stone flies. They kind of work, but this guy in the circle here, like with a pink head and just all scraggly with like flash dubbing, for whatever reason, um, seems to work a little bit better for me. And then, egg patterns, like it's a nuke egg on the bottom there, or any kind of yarn fly, especially when earlier in the season when there's a lot of salmon that have gone through or the browns have been spawning. That's when you want to be throwing something like that. And then the other option is streamers. So, you know, we do get rain, they do get a lot of snow, water levels do come up and down. And when you're able to swing, if you're fishing Lake Erie, the bottom left fly there is called a white death or a zonker. That is an absolute killer on the Lake Erie tributaries. Uh, if you're gonna go fish any of them, you got to bring that one with you. They the shiner population in Lake Erie is so strong that it becomes a major food group, targeted food source for all the fish. And steelhead, they're no different. Um, when they come into the rivers, it just becomes a reaction. So if you can swing a fly at them, and sometimes even when the water's low and it like doesn't seem like it's good swinging, if you can like get back far enough and get this to swing in front of their face, it just becomes like a reaction. You can see their body language change, and they'll come up and crush it. But the other one is the top right corner is like a instead of just like a regular egg sucking leech, which I don't know if you how much you can see. Where am I here? So instead of just like a regular egg sucking leech, which is like a woolly bugger with a bright bead head, after I've tied the woolly bugger, I'll throw marabou in a loop and go in between the hackle. Okay.
Keep going.
So instead of the regular egg sucking leech style, which is like a woolly bugger with um a bright colored bead head, uh I mean the egg sucking leech normally has a yarn head, but after I've wrapped the hackle up, what I do is I put marabou in a loop and wrap it between the hackle. And what that does is it
Hmm.
forces that marabou to stay kind of big and pulsy, and it really pulses. So it kind of almost acts like a spay style, like the hobo style space, where you have a lot of motion in the water, but it becomes this tiny little compact thing, and it looks like an egg sucking leech. And if the water has any color to it, like that's probably the go-to. Unless you're on Erie, then you're going to fish the white death. So this is one of my favorite rigs. I call it the cheater's rig because I'm actually not really using a fly. I'm stealing a technique from my steelhead days, and that's using, I don't know if you can see, it's a soft bead on the tippet, and then I tie a hook on underneath that. And the reason I do that, I was using yarn eggs a lot, and I was deep hooking fish, and especially when you don't notice right away, if you've deep hooked a fish and you're fighting it a little bit, you're they're going to end up bleeding, and that's increases the chance of mortality. And I remember that when I was steelheading with the center pin and we would fish an egg like this, almost all the fish came hooked on the side. So I started doing that under the fly, under an indicator, and I started hooking more fish on the side. So I'm not so worried about deep hooking fish. Um, it's a lot easier on the fish, and yeah, sure, it's not a fly, but I'm more concerned about releasing the fish than fishing a true egg pattern.
Dan,
Um,
that is a rig that they use a lot in Alaska.
yep.
Just they just put the egg with a toothpick holding the egg about 1.5 inches above the hook, just as you have it there. So you've
Yep.
nailed it, man. You've nailed
Oh
it.
yeah. Yeah, I can't take credit for this rig 'cause like I said, like it's been years and years and years that I've been doing this when I'm center pinning, right? It's just like I said, with I would start using glow eggs, glow bugs, sorry, or yarnies or the nuke eggs, and a lot of the fish were getting hooked deep, and I just kind of didn't like that, and especially because again, trying to release these fish. So
Yeah, Dan, I got a question for you. You
yeah,
talked about having a soft egg. What about the hard plastic eggs versus the soft? What's the difference?
density. Honestly, the biggest difference is density. So, um, I actually have both here. So I have hard eggs and soft eggs. So, so for one, this is like a year's worth of soft eggs. I don't know if you can see that, maybe more. I might have had this pack for like 2 years now. This is a season's worth of hard eggs for me. For whatever reason, I tend to lose them more. They get snagged more. I think it's because they're heavier. They're gonna sink faster. So I also feel like they're not quite as natural. So if I'm in a little more current, if the water's got a little bit of color to it, I'll switch over to a glass or a plastic bead, a hard plastic bead. But if I'm in clearer water, which is usually when I'm switching to this rig, I'm gonna want the plastic egg because I think it's gonna act a little more like a natural egg would. The other part of this is the copper john. I tie a copper john with a weighted body and a tungsten head, and I use that as my shot. And honestly, that was a um, discovery of necessity. I was fishing Wilmot Creek and I ran out of shot. And I'm like, well, I was like a 45-minute walk back to the car. And I'm like, I got these flies that are kind of heavy. I'm just going to tie this on instead. I was running a 2-fly rig and I realized that as soon as I did this, the fish did not care about my rig coming past them. So I think the fish were seeing that split shot and thinking like, that's weird. That shouldn't be there. But when they see a fly come by, it just doesn't bother them. So tying a copper john in a size 10 or 12 or an 8 or whatever you got to do, or even if it's a stone fly, packing as much weight as you can on that fly, use that as your weight. And then the thing is fish will eat it too, right? So now it's instead of just having a split shot there, tangling up, messing up, scaring fish, you have two offerings for the fish, and one's acting as a weight to get your egg pattern down, whatever pattern you're using. Um, and as far as indicators go, these are pretty much the only two I use through the winter and fall. Yarn works great, but when it starts to get cold, the yarn holding the water is going to freeze. Becomes difficult to move, and sometimes once it's frozen and locked up, it just sinks right away. The Oros I kind of like because the line goes through. Um, it it doesn't twist as much in the water as the airlocks would, but the advantage to the airlock, especially when it gets cold, because the line isn't going through, if you see like the bottom of that airlock, it has like a little bit of a grip there. So if you get any ice on it, it's pretty easy to break that ice off with your fingers and open it up. Whereas the Oros, sometimes if it gets iced up, you can't open it. It'll actually like freeze itself together. And the other nice thing about these is they come in different sizes. So I can fish this tiny, which is, just a little bit bigger than a soft plastic egg with that rig. And the fish really do not care at all, even in like super low, super clear water. And then, you know, the other thing you got to make sure you bring is a net, and bring a big net. Like these steelhead and these browns get big. I know guys who will beach them, and you're asking for trouble. They're gonna smash around on the rocks. They're gonna end up in the mud. They're not small. They got a ton of energy. You get them in a net, you're gonna land them faster. And then you have a place to work on them. You have a place to hold them in between pictures. And then if you're in fast water, you have a place to like let them recover before you send them off on their way. So the other thing is weather. Like I don't know how much you guys know about that Buffalo and Niagara area on the US side there, but during steelhead season it gets cold. We get icy, your guides are going to ice up and all that, so loon paste is real good. And the other thing you got to consider is it's going to snow. It snows a lot, and it snows frequently. And when it snows, it snows. Like that's not a snowbank I'm standing beside. That's them clearing the parking lot. Um, and if you haven't met me in person, I'm 6'3", and that's up to my elbows. So, David might just see the top of his head running around there. But the other things, base layers are super important. When you're fishing in the winter, warm wool socks and bring an extra pair. Liner gloves have been something that's been really useful for me because I have a lot of really nice big warm gloves, but you can't fish with them. You can't tie knots with them. A pair of like really thin liner gloves, you can do almost anything with your fingers with them. Keep them on, keeps the wind off you. Heat packs for your hands are a good one. Bring a pair of boots. I know guys that like I've gone out with some guys and they show up in running shoes. And in Toronto, there's not much snow on the ground, and you get out there and it's snow and it's slushy and it's whatever. It just becomes uncomfortable. You start your day with wet feet. Like wear a pair of boots to begin with, not even just to fish before you put your waders on. And then a shovel and traction aids. So that bottom right corner, those orange things. I'm pointing like you guys can see what I'm pointing at. I'm sorry. The those are traction aids. Those go underneath your wheels if you do get stuck because they might not be calling for snow, but you never know what's going to happen or where you're going to end up. It's like $30 and it's saved me and friends multiple times on trips out there. So with the nymphing leaders, I'm fishing like a 9 foot 3 or 4X leader. And then I'm going as long as I need to go with the tippet. Sometimes I'll go like another 5 feet with the tippet. If I'm doing that, that's usually because I'm trying to stay as far away from that fish as possible. Throwing that tuck cast, making sure that I'm not getting my fly line or the butt section of my leader going over those fish. With the streamers, I'm actually throwing poly leaders. So like, you guys know poly leaders, right? So they're like sinking tips that you can just loop to loop tie on. And I'm usually bringing like 5 foot and 8 foot poly leaders, and I'm tying on like 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon in front of that. And anywhere from like 18 to 12 to 18 inches in front of that of 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon, and then swinging streamers behind that. So there's the I've already put it in the chat, but there's the New York the water data site. So it tells you the water levels and it gives you a graph as well. Rising, rising water, fish are going to be moving in. It's a migratory thing. That's when you want to be swinging those streamers and fishing a little more aggressively. Those fish are coming in from the lake. They're still hot. They're still kind of, they're coming in thinking about spawning, but they still have feeding from the lake on their mind. If the water's falling, the fish are going to be looking and they're going to start to move into the pools. So instead of fishing those runs, start moving back into those pools, fishing those pools. And that's when you can do a little bit of streamer, a little bit of nymphing. It all kind of works. And then when he gets that low water is when you really want to, like usually by mid to late November, they get some really low water there. Clear water, you're going to be fishing really small nymphs. And like, most of those steelhead that I showed so far have been on like a size 18 hare's ear. Like really small, really, really small nymphs on like 4 pound test lead. Just because you can see the fish in the water moving away from. Have you ever seen like the guys who are salmon fishing with a float and like a golf size row bag? See all those salmon sitting there, and all of a sudden they just like part like the Red Sea and then kind of come back in together. And when you see steelhead do that, when you think you're finesse fishing, it's like you're still not finessey enough. You have to keep paring down, keep going smaller. And if they spend a week or more in that river, they kind of get used to the food that's flowing through. So you can start treating them like resident fish as well. See what's in the river, see the size of the bugs, start matching the hatch. And the other one is to get your license. I also threw that link in the chat. And the license really isn't all that expensive. And the nice thing about the license in New York is that it is like 1 calendar year from when you buy it. So, I mean, there's a ton of fishing opportunity in New York aside from these migratory trout. Like Lake Erie has bass all year long. And in the spring, they're up super shallow. But that's New York. So before we head to Florida, is there any New York questions?
What about Pennsylvania?
Yeah, like that whole Steelhead Alley, most of that Erie stuff. The Erie rivers kind of go all the way into Pennsylvania. You get the Steelhead Alley and all that. I've briefly touched that, but it just becomes like, why am I going to drive another hour when I could get good fishing right here?
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So the next one is Florida, and Florida's been a lot of peacock bass and saltwater fishing, and I've been doing this. I've been going down there now regularly for 7 years, and all those dots, other than along the coast, are peacock spots. And as great as the saltwater fishing is, for some reason, I've been drawn more and more to the peacock bass, and I think it's just because they're so willing to play with fly fishermen. And it's kind of like if the sun's out, they're going to play. Whereas the saltwater, you have to know your tide charts. You have to know what's kind of like what baits around, time of the year, it all matters. Whereas the peacocks, it's really like, is it sunny? All right, they're going to eat. And even if it's not sunny, they might eat, but not quite as much. So, but why fish Florida? I mean, for one, it's Florida, right? A lot of people go on vacation down there. Why not pack a fly rod and some flies? It's a great place to vacation with the family. So that's a good way to make an excuse to do a fishing vacation. Especially when I get into like where you can find the peacocks, you'll understand why. Food is relatively cheap down there, especially compared to here. Gas is cheap down there, especially compared to here. So even if you were to go down specifically for fishing and hop around, it's not going to cost a whole lot. There's lots of places to fish. Like private property is very minimal down there. There's a lot of signs that you see that say no fishing, and then they give you a reason underneath, and you realize that it's an insurance thing, and no one's actually ever said anything to anyone who's fished those areas. If you're not allowed to fish there, if it's private property, they put up a fence. It's kind of hard to explain, and it feels really awkward every time I cross one of those signs, but I've been with enough people down there and they've done it. And fishing opportunities abound. Like again, aside from peacock bass, like just from the saltwater from shore, you have shots at snook, tarpon, bonefish, jack crevalles, redfish, sea trout. If you go down to the Keys, you get permit. You can even get sharks, like from shore. Like never mind hooking up with a guide, which there's thousands of guides down there, and you can get out with any of them, and they'll get you on fish. Like yeah. And then of course there's Chick-fil-A, 1,000 taco places, and Publix fried chicken, which will ruin food for you up here. So most people that go down there, they travel by plane. If you're gonna go down, I would suggest packing like a set. If you're not gonna buy gear specifically for down there, stuff up here that worked for me, I bring my 7 weight and my 10 weight down. And the beauty of that is you can fit 2 rods in one regular rod tube, right? You just offset the butts, throw them in the rod tube. And with one rod tube, you can carry that on. You don't have to check it, right? Either you strap it to your backpack or you just say, hey, this is a fly rod. And with the exception of Spirit Air, no one has ever given me a problem. The one thing you will need to buy is a tropical line. Our line, like the line that we use up here for trout, does not work down there. I was looking for this picture, and I think I've told the story to a couple people, but the first time I was down there, I didn't have a 10-weight tropical line, and I just thought, I'm going to use it for like half a day. It's not going to be that bad. Made my first cast, go to pick it up, and I'm deciding to make my cast, like make a turn with it, and I go to make a turn with it, and it was about like a 45-degree turn, which normally isn't that much of a problem, but the line got so soft because it was so hot. The line, it just went limp, wrapped around me. I ended up with a hook in my face. I had a buff and a beard, so it didn't go in too deep, but that was actually the first time she was my girlfriend at the time. Now she's my wife. And I just kind of called her over and I'm like, we got to deal with something. And so I taught her how to take a hook out of a person, but went out and bought a 10 weight, the proper line. And it really does make a huge difference down there. The other thing is fluorocarbon tippet. You can get away with mono tippet, but you're probably going to be changing it every fish if you don't break off. The fish down there, especially in the saltwater, are meant to eat other fish, and meant to not be eaten by other fish. So they have sharp teeth, whether they're grinding teeth or, cutting teeth. They have gill rakers, they have gill plates. Like if you catch, even a medium-sized snook, their gill rakers will cut through 10-pound test line like it's nothing. So fluorocarbon is much more abrasion resistant. Even the peacocks will chew away at it. Like 10-pound fluoro on 2 or 3 peacocks, and you got to retie because you can see the fluorocarbon starting to fray. Bite wire is the other one. If you're going to be chasing stuff like cudas or shark or anything like that, I mean, you'd probably get away with 100-pound fluorocarbon, but bite wire is a lot easier to deal with. Polyleaders, if you're going to be fishing the beach, which I do recommend, and it's actually a lot of fun to hit the beach in the morning if you can time the tides right. You want at least an intermediate polyleader. If you have a completely floating line, the waves are going to be consistently pushing your line and your leader, and you'll never have like good contact with your fly, and you'll never actually move your fly. Your fly would just be kind of moving with the current. So it's almost like you have a constant slack line. So you need to get your line just a little bit below the surface. And it seems kind of silly to throw a sinking line in inches of water or a foot or two of water, but if you're not, the waves are just going to kind of own you all day. Obviously, you're going to pack some flies, and we'll get into what flies those are. And then also very important is pliers and cutters. Again, toothy fish, heavier line. You need to be able to cut the line, and you need to be able to get the flies out of the fish's mouth without leaving a finger in their mouth. Like I was saying, fluoro tippet, it really is a must. I would say 10-pound minimum for peacocks, and you can probably get away with 20-pound for like snook and jacks. But if you can go like 25, 30-pound, it's probably a little bit better. If you're going to attempt cudas or anything like that, you need steel. Scientific anglers, I'm sure a lot of guys have this tie-bowl bite wire that comes on a little spool, fits on your little like tippet harness pretty easily. As far as flies, honestly, like these are pretty much the only 4 I pack. I have a couple like crab imitations and shrimp imitations that I have, because I tied them a bunch of years ago and I just haven't used them because these ones have kind of served me well. They've worked in the salt and they've worked for the peacocks and they've worked for largemouth as well. They're bait fish imitation and the clouser. If you tie them in like pinkish colors and tannish colors, you're imitating shrimp. Unless you're going to go down to the Keys and you want to chase permit, you don't need crab patterns. Shrimp and bait fish will kind of cover you for most things. And then the black and purple guy, it's called a tarpon bunny. You can tie that in a bunch of different colors too. And then like a double bunny or a bunny clouser or whatever you want to call that guy there, for when you got to slow down a little bit, which isn't very often. The one cool thing about fishing down there, like I said, these fish are designed to eat other fish, or crabs or shrimp, but they're mostly piscivores, which means the bait fish tend to move fast because they don't want to be eaten. So they're used to seeing things move fast. So if you're like me and you like moving quickly when you're fishing and ripping through an area, like it's kind of built for you down there. So heavier flies, like even that little EP deceiver there, the hook shank is just wrapped in weight wire. So you're moving fast when you're moving. And then the fish tend to beat the shit out of your flies. So bring lots of them or know where to go buy some and pick some up. Like the double bunny, like they literally ripped the top uh, um, rabbit strip, literally like not ripped it off, but it wore away. So like through the hide of that rabbit, and half of my on the other side there. Sorry, I keep pointing to the screen like you guys can see what I'm doing. The other half, the EP deceiver, like half of the tail and half of the body's been ripped up too. And like you know how hard it is to destroy EP fiber. So or know where to buy more or bring a tying kit with you. And like I said with pliers, bring a long set of pliers because if you're gonna catch a cuda, and if you're fishing in the salt, assume you're gonna get one. I think pretty much every time that I've walked the beach, um, I've tangled into one, at least one a trip, if not more. But you don't want to be anywhere near those teeth. So bring a pair of pliers. I actually found these pliers. These are the Rapala ones. Couldn't find a link for them, but I find them down there in most of the shops. I've had them for about 5 years now, and they haven't rusted out. And that's probably the only thing that I don't wash. And they have a really good set of cutters on there too that can cut the metal. And the nice thing about a combo like this, where you have the long needle nose pliers and the cutters built in, so if you take that on a plane, they don't give you a hard time. But if you bring scissors on a plane, they're going to give you a hard time. So, as far as traveling with, combo is definitely the way to go. And then peacock bass, and one of the reasons why I like fishing for peacocks, honestly, they're made for the fly. I probably spent a year trying to chase them with terminal tackle. And other than live bait, I couldn't figure out how to catch them. And then one day I was just coming back from fishing a beach, went by a peacock spot. All I had was my fly gear. And it was like almost every fish that I saw follow and ate. So I don't know what it is about the fly. Maybe it just pulses differently in the water. Um, Maybe I fish it differently. I'm not sure. But uh, it's great for fly anglers. If you're fishing with kids, you can get a lot of action through the day on them. They're not small either. Like you can get 3-4 pounders quite frequently, pretty much anywhere south of Boca. So if you're like south of Boca Raton, pretty much all the canals and all the ponds are going to have peacocks, and you can tell pretty quickly because if you approach slowly, you'll see them there. They don't spook right away. Um, the only thing is like the closer to the glades you get, the farther north the peacocks live. But the closer to the glades you get, closer to the gators you get. So that's the one thing you got to watch. I tend to do most of my fishing out by the coast, and that's because I'm just not interested in getting this close to the gators without my long camera lens. So if you're gonna fish the canals, like there are fish in the canals that I've only ever seen in aquariums at times. Like any invasive and every invasive species is in an aquarium, and the ponds kind of get like that too. The other nice thing about the ponds, a lot of them have some pretty big largemouth in there. But you'll get fish like tilapia, jaguar cichlids, Oscars, all kinds of different fish. So even though you're hoping to catch peacocks, you really do never know what you're going to catch, even in the freshwater stuff and in the saltwater. Like Florida has almost 100 species of freshwater fish, and much more than that when it comes to saltwater fish to target. So, like I said, like opportunities abound. It's really is just about anything, and you can target pretty much all of it with the fly rod. Like I think shark might be the hardest thing to target with the fly rod, and to be honest, like I don't know that I'd want to, but um, yeah. And then with the salt, like I said, snook, tarpon, all kinds of different jacks, bonefish, and with the exception of that one tarpon in that picture, this is all stuff from shore that's easily accessible to just about anyone. And the nice thing is like if you're gonna stay on the beach, like you're going down on a vacation, you're gonna stay on the beach. You don't need to bring a lot of gear, um, but you can fish early in the morning. You look at the tide charts. I'll send that link up. I look at the tide charts and fish when the tide's coming in, fish when the tide's going out, right? So it's like an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, an hour in the evening, are the like hot windows. And then you have whole day to do whatever you're planning on doing. Weather, yeah, it's gonna be hot. Florida has 2 seasons, and uh, you kind of get them a couple times a day because it's gonna be hot and it's gonna rain, especially if you're down there in the summer. Is anyone getting this joke? Have you guys Family Guy fans? Okay.
Yeah, Dan, I get it. I get it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was doing this and I'm just laughing to myself and I'm thinking, no one's gonna get this, and I'm just gonna be okay, anyways. Some non-fishing necessities that you got to bring with you: wading shoes and pants. So, with the exception of on the beach, don't go barefoot. If you're gonna go for peacocks, wear shoes, wear pants. I have like a lot of different brands make them, but like those light summery whatever pants. There's tons of bugs. They call them no-see-ums because you don't see them. They'll eat you alive. But also like bush rash. Like I've gotten some of the worst scratches that just flare up like crazy on me. It's a thing down there. Like it's a warm environment, and when you're on the beach, it's beautiful. But as soon as you leave the beach, it all changes. The other things are like the sun shirts, like the Columbia Omnicool. It's nice because it really does keep you cool. As you start to sweat, it cools down. But they also all have a hood. And as great as a hat is, that hood's going to cover your ears. It's going to cover the back of your neck, and it's kind of breezy. Not, tucked to you. The other thing is, it's like a Yeti style water bottle, or like any of those like cooler style water bottles. I think Stanley makes them too, like something like that. Because if you're using just like a regular water bottle, it's going to boil. Like that water is going to be warm in minutes. And then a light breathable raincoat's a good idea. You know, it's gonna rain and it's gonna get hot again. Because it's Florida, and I mean, it's hot. That's not even a joke. Like that's the weather forecast in like the medium temperature months down in South Florida sometimes. So, and then I'll share these links as well. So one of them is the Solunar table. I don't know how many of you guys know what the Solunar table is. So the Solunar table has to do with where the moon and the sun are in position to the earth, and that affects animal activity. So up here, musky fishermen, lake trout fishermen, realistically, I think all fishermen should understand how this works because it does affect the way fish eat. It affects animal activity. You ever notice like sometimes your cat would be totally chill, and then all of a sudden, oh, super active, and then an hour or two later, it's just totally chill again. Like it's not a fluke. I bet you if you looked at a Solunar table, that your animal's activity is going to coincide with the times of high activity and low activity. So the link fishingreminder.com, it's a free link. You can go there. It shows you the Solunar tables, shows you when the high activities are. And then it also shows you the tides in the area. Like if you select the area that you're at, it'll show you your tide. And if you're going to fish salt, tide is really important. So you can see in the back of this picture, you can kind of see the high water mark and the low water mark. So we're fishing like an outgoing tide. And an outgoing tide can be really good for big predators because that outgoing tide, all the bait fish that have found refuge up shallow, they're now getting pushed deep. So these bigger fish can hang out in those deeper troughs and just peck away at these fish that have nowhere else to go because there's no water up shallow anymore. And then again, where to get your Florida license. And like New York, most states that I've been to actually have had, it's like 1 calendar year for a license, which is kind of cool too. And Florida, for a non-resident, it's the same price as a resident license in Ontario. So it's pretty cheap to get your license down there too.
Dan, can you just give me a little bit of insight as to the difference between fishing the shoreline in Florida and the mangroves?
Like shoreline is in the beach.
Yep.
So to fish the mangroves, you need like some sort of a craft basically to get to them, right? So the mangroves are usually um, very rarely on the beach. Most of the mangroves are kind of going to be in the canals, in uh, the estuaries before it goes out to the lake, out to the lake before it goes out to the ocean. So you kind of need a craft to get in. Most people go in with like a skiff or but fishing wise, what you're looking to do, how you're planning on fishing, like planning the tides and all that, it's kind of all the same. But it's just the beach is there's no mangroves along the beach. Like you'll find the odd mangrove pod, but the actual mangroves themselves are, yeah, you need a boat.
Dan,
Yeah,
uh, I see on the dots of Florida you were on the Gulf Coast, the West Coast as well, and that's really the limit of my experience, Marco Island.
yeah.
And from the beach, like just like you say, uh, to the critters, ladyfish. I was surprised when I started getting broken off after catching a couple of them, and
Hmm.
they have teeth,
They
and
have to.
Spanish mackerel. And the two flies that worked for me best were schminnows and chartreuse and white clouser.
Hmm.
Um, but tarpon and barracuda, no, I didn't encounter.
I don't see as many barracuda on the West Coast.
Okay,
Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know that I've caught one on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, my wife's family's on the East Coast, so
okay.
I fish there. The East Coast much more, but
Hmm.
we actually do go to the West Coast every couple years, and actually Marco Island.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, and like Marco Island in June, July, August, um, is like snook crazy,
Okay. Yeah. My
and
my time was May and last time was October 2019.
mhm,
And that's when the mullet were spawning and the
mhm.
fishing was crazy, just crazy.
I, the October, like mid to late October, you get the king tide, and then you
Hmm.
get the mullet run as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that range, it's on the East Coast as well, and it's the craziest time. Like those videos you see of crazy saltwater things happening, that's during the mullet run. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, the amount of birds, the amount of fish, like you'll just see football fields sized schools of mullet coming along, and then all of a sudden the whole school just opens up, and you just see this big flash of a 200-pound tarpon. It's like craziness.
Yep.
Best time to fish down there. But yeah,
What about sunglasses? Are there any special sunglasses that you use?
um, so I used to kind of just wear whatever cheap pair of sunglasses I could fit around my head. But I started using, so in this picture here, they're Maui Jims. So Maui Jim and Costa, they make their sunglasses a little bit differently. They're expensive, but they're not laminate. And that's the key because the salt will delaminate your glasses. So, I mean, if you're going down there for like a week to fish, it's not really a big deal. Um, light grays from shore, light grays are fine. But if you're gonna fish down there more often, or uh, you're gonna, beat the snot out of your sunglasses, get something that's not, excuse me, something that's not laminated.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you found that you need, like, I always wonder about saltwater rods versus freshwater rods. Do you think you need a rod for saltwater specifically, or are you
Okay.
okay if you just rinse off your freshwater rod?
That was a note that I had that I hid by accident here, and I didn't mean to bring that up. Yeah, so the salt will corrode everything. So like as far as reels go, I would definitely look for something with a sealed drag. Even if you're planning on rinsing it, unless you're gonna, if it's not a sealed drag, you gotta literally open it up, rinse it, even spray it down, let it
Yeah,
dry, right?
yeah,
With
yeah,
rods, if you rinse it right away, you don't let it dry, or if it dries and you notice that it's still a little bit salty, you get that off quickly. It's not such a big deal, but if you have something that's like anodized,
yeah.
you're much better off. Like
Sure.
salt
Yeah,
will beat the snot out of your gear for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the beaches, like the public access beaches, have showers on the way in and on the way out. And, like I'll get in line with my gear and everyone's going and like, rinsing off the salt from their bodies. And I shove my gear under there, like just get it rinsed off right away,
Yeah.
before it dries. And I haven't
And
had any problems.
how about flies? Are you rusting through flies pretty quick?
Rusting? No, no. 'Cause again, I'm rinsing them as well.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you're not using like stainless or saltwater hooks or anything like that?
Not always.
Yeah. Okay.
Not always. No.
Because they tend to be not quite as sharp, I think. Just
Right.
the wire diameter is usually a lot bigger on the saltwater hooks.
It's usually not a problem because again, everything is so fast down there. When
Yeah.
the fish grab, I can't remember on the salt. I can't remember the last time I actually set hook on a fish. It's more like strip, strip. Oh my God, I got a fish. Right? They come up, they grab it, and they turn. Most of those fish, they're not swimming alone, right? So it's like, it's like, have you guys ever been bass fishing? You pitch to some cover, the
Yeah.
fish grabs the bait and swims toward you,
One follows it.
right? Even if the other one isn't following you, but why is that fish swimming toward you? He's swimming toward you because there's competition behind him, right? So he's going to grab that bait, move away so he can finish dealing with it without the other fish potentially taking it away. Same thing happens in the salt. Fish come up, they grab your bait and they take off. So you're not really setting hook. You get tight to them real quick. You're using heavier lines. The fact that it's not, as sharp, it's not as critical. I mean, I bring a hone. I sharpen my hooks all the time. But honestly, like if you touch the sand behind you once on a cast, your hook's semi-rolled anyways. So
And are you generally strip setting, I assume?
no, I'm holding on for dear life. I'm, I still remember the first fish I caught in the salt. When I when I landed it, it came out. I'm like, where's the rest of this thing? I honestly thought something had come up, grabbed it, and took.
Yeah.
It would have been like an 8-inch amberjack.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I honestly thought I was pulling in a 20, 30-inch fish.
Yeah.
They're so much stronger down there. And again, the speed, they grab it and they turn. Like they're doing all the work for you.
Yeah. First time I caught a grouper, it was with gear, and we were using basically a 2x4 with guides on it. And
The big Goliaths.
it was just a stick. The rod was just a stick, and I fought this thing for a long time. And when I finally got it in, I was expecting a monster, and it was like 10 pounds. And I looked at the guide and I went, "That was what fought like that. It was unbelievable."
Dan, do you ever get jacks in the surf?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Are you weighed out and are you are you fishing in the white water behind waves and stuff? Or
It depends where I'm fishing. I used to wait out.
yeah,
I've stopped doing that. I kind of realized like where the trough is. So there's
mhm,
when you look at the beach, so you have where the waves break, not where the waves come up and end, right?
mhm.
Then there's a drop, and it's called the trough. It comes back up and then it gets shallow again. That
Mhm.
deep area there is like a highway for all the fish,
But
and they're all
sometimes that's right by the beach, like
yeah.
literally right by the beach.
It's
Yeah,
usually like on low tide, it can be like 3-4 steps out.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and that's kind of where you want to fish. Like, if you can like if you're gonna scout, go scout on low slack tide.
Yeah,
Look for that trough. If you're on the west side, that trough is everything.
okay,
On the west side, you can walk out into the trough and cast straight down the trough, right?
okay.
Uh, on a rising tide or a high slack tide, I would stay out away from it. Most of the snook that I catch on the west side are cruising on a high tide, on a high slack tide. So you understand,
Okay.
like do you know the difference between a high tide, a rising tide, a low rising tide,
Yeah, yeah. Like a
slack tide,
slack tide's
dropping?
like it's not changing. It's like you're right in the middle of it. Yeah,
Yeah, and on,
yeah.
on the East Coast, that's like don't fish. But on the
Right.
West Coast, a high slack tide, the snook are going to come up and they're going to root around and they're going to look for shrimp. They're going to look for like bait that's looking for shrimp and stuff like that. And snook are opportunistic, right? Imagine a walleye with the attitude of a smallmouth. That's kind of how I look at snook, right? So any kind of bait fish pattern, any kind of even like small tarpon bunnies or those EP streamers, when you walk, stay way back up so you can look down, you'll spot them, walk down, drop your bait out in front of it, and they'll kind of come around and they'll, oh, what's this? A little bit of a longer leader and a little more of a delicate presentation. As delicate as you can be with 20-pound test, but yeah, you'll get them on a high tide, but on a low tide or a moving tide, like you can get in the trough and just cast up and down the trough.
Cool. When you go down, do you take you check you check bag and you never any issues checking flies?
Checking, I've had no
No
issues
issues.
at all.
You can't.
I've carried them. No, I carry them on.
You
Like
carry them
last,
on.
I've carried them on. I haven't had any issues. Now, the biggest fly that I'm bringing along is like a 2/0.
Yeah.
So it's not really.
I've carried them on before, but I'm always willing to you got to be willing to lose them. Do you know what I mean? Because if the guy at the gate says no way, Jose, you're like, well, I'm obviously not missing my flight, so you put him in the garbage, right? You know what I mean? Like it's
yeah. Again, like a 2/0 hook it's not all that big, right? I can understand if you had one of those big 6/0 or 8/0 hooks, then they're looking at that like, well, that's you could hold on to that and probably do some damage with that, but
yeah.
I haven't had any problem.
So you've carried and checked no problem, and you've carried no problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had no problem checking any of my gear.
Yeah.
I after seeing how they handle the luggage, I don't think I'd send a rod there anymore.
Or it doesn't come, or it doesn't get there for 5 days, or disappears, or something, right?
I've been lucky about that. So, but since you can call ahead and be like, hey, can I carry on a fly rod? And they're like, a fly rod, how big is it? Yeah, usually it's not a problem, with the exception of Spirit. But Spirit, you can bring a small purse on, and then anything else they're going to charge you. So